Hello, welcome to Miniatures, my name is Stuart, and welcome to another Battlefield in a Box tutorial video. We've had Pimp My Road, here's Pimp My House. So a few weeks back I did a video on how to weather Battlefield in a Box roads. I think they're fantastic bits of terrain, but I always find that they look a little bit plain on the tabletop and kind of don't really sort of sit into the environment very well, and that's the nature of them being factory painted as opposed to something being made at home. I really love the fact that they're kind of pre-painted and quick to use out of the box. I don't have a lot of time for building terrain, but I also want a certain look to it, so that I decided to have a quick go at weathering it and produced a video which was fairly popular, had a few comments, and including one of my sort of regular viewers, Paul, who I've also done a bit of commission work for in the past, and we got chatting about it a little bit, and he liked what I'd done. He's got lots of this stuff at home and wondered if I was going to do a follow-up video where I focused on the buildings and houses and things that Battlefield in a Box make for Flames of War as well. I can't remember now whether I mentioned it in the video or not that I wanted to try it with some of the buildings, or whether it was something that I just had it battering around in my head, but Paul and I sort of started a bit of an email discussion around whether I planned to do it, and I said I'd like to, but essentially I didn't own many of the buildings, and as I previously bought quite a lot of MDF buildings for my current Flames of War project, I wasn't at this stage ready to go out and buy lots of the Flames of War ones, though I really like them and it's something I might like to own in the future, but I just sort of need a good sort of 20 odd buildings, and at sort of £15-20 a pop, that it soon adds up. So it's something for the future for me, I told him, really, and he said, well, if I send you one, will you do a video? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Why not? And we talked a little bit more, and essentially what we settled on was Paul would send me one European style house and one of the desert buildings, and I would go ahead, produce a video, and then I'll send them on to him afterwards. He did offer to purchase me a building as well as a bit of a thank you for doing it, but essentially he's providing me with a couple of models to create content with, and it's something I wanted to do anyway, and it meant that I could do the video a little bit sooner. Now, in the meantime, after we'd arranged to do this and ordered models and things, Alid, who I mentioned a lot of the videos, just as a random name out there, but my friend Alid also helped me get hold of the Eastern Railway bundle, which included the railway station, and since then I've actually bought some desert buildings of my own for my up-and-coming North Africa projects once I've got some of the European ones out of the way. So while I'm not using the African buildings in this video, I will also use the railway buildings alongside the Munich house and the desert building Paul provided. Essentially what I want to do is very similar to the roads video, is using an airbrush to kind of add some extra dirt and weathering and shadow, and then I'll add a little bit of weathering and things with the hairy brush as well, a few little effects here and there, but all stuff that's relatively simple. Now, if you don't own an airbrush, and the video hopefully will still be useful to you, so anything you see as an airbrushing stage you could do as a dry brush, though you would need to use different paints because I'm going to be using inks and contrast paints through the airbrush. Before I crack the airbrush out, I just wanted to address something on the Munich house. The white is very flat and plain. I thought the best way of doing that would be to add some shadow, and contrast apothecary white is essentially a grey glaze, and it's just a really perfect way of adding a little bit of shadow to the doors and the window frames and just making it look less kind of flat painted. So I started with that, and it's very easy. I'm applying it straight out of the pot here, one thin coat over the whole thing, making sure that the paint does pull slightly in some of the recesses, and this is where this kind of grey there will basically shade the white. Now with that dry, it's time to get the airbrush out. Now I'm going to be using Garex Sewer, which is the same colour I used in the Pimp My Roads. It's a nice kind of rich, warm brown, very inky. You could definitely use sort of chestnut ink or something like that if you wish to. You don't have to use contrast through the airbrush. You could even use just a sort of a darker brown colour, but I find that this goes through the airbrush without really any thinning. I tend to put maybe a drop of water in if I find it's not going through right. outside, and it just spraying it along the bottom of the buildings here. It's just providing a kind of a dirty layer where passing traffic, whether that foot or cars and things, would eventually get that bottom of the building looking a little bit dirty, and it just adds some natural shadow in at the same time. Quite handily, these buildings come apart, so it's a little bit easier to sort of apply the same to the lower level, or the lower parts rather, of the mid-level here. The reason I'm doing that is I think some rainwater and dirt and grime after it's run down the building would stop at the ledge, again creating a little bit of bit of a dirt layer, and also it just adds a little bit of shadow which gives the building more definition. I also do the same along the edge of the roof structure because there is another ledge there. And then I'll move on to the roof itself slightly, and just sort of paint in some grime and streaks on those already green tiles. Now they're already slightly multi-tone. I'm just being very gentle here with the airbrush, just adding a little bit. Obviously you can't take it away very easily, so less is more to start with, and just take it easy. A little bit of dirt around the chimney, a little bit at the top, and then I just sort of almost do streaks down with the airbrush. It's very, very simple. It's very easy and therapeutic if you're used to airbrushing, even just a little bit. As long as you take it easy, you'll find you just sort of build in some darker areas, like where the rain and things may have stained the roof over years. Now I want to add a little bit of shadow and dirt underneath the ledge, but I don't want to obliterate the white either. So I'm actually holding the build together in its three parts here quite carefully. I want to kind of get a feeling for the whole piece all together. So I'm being very gentle here, but I am adding a little bit to the top where those ledges are as well. Again, where some water may have run down the front of the buildings. Where I live, we've got a real mix of different sort of houses, colours and things. Some are sandstone, some are brick. There's quite a few that are rendered and painted, and they really seem to sort of stain quite badly at times. And I wanted to just add a little bit of that effect with this building here. And I wanted to sort of show how the technique continues to work on the different building types. So this is one of the railway buildings. If it's a signalman's box or something, but using exactly the same paint to the Garrick sewer through the airbrush, and I can go in and paint the same techniques and the same layers on those as well. And if anything, these colours make it stand out even more. Moving on to the roof on this one, this looks like a metal roof, whether it's a lead roof or something like that. Again, just a few patches on the metal itself to show where it would have discoloured and the weather's sort of beaten it over the years, and it just really sort of starts to bring the model to life, make it look less toy-like and more model-like, more war game scenery-like. And of course all those techniques work on the large station too, which is exactly the same materials as the signal box. I continue to add layers slowly here, trying to build it up so I don't go too heavy at once. Even in areas that won't be exactly by the side of the road, it just adds a little bit of grime and dirt and as I said already, some shadow. I've left the insides, they're mostly unpainted. Removed the roof there for easy access to the underside. So in that sense, it's more shadow here rather than grime, but then a few little streaks and things down. And again, I think the effect is quite pleasing when it's all finished. And the same colour works on the desert building as well. So the desert building, I think, is a little bit better out the box. Looks less sort of starkly plain colour. I think it's just naturally because of the texture and the dry brushing effect that's already on it. But again, still, it's a little bit bright on the scale of things that I like things that look a little bit dirtier and grimier. And again, it's more Garrick sewer. And I also did all the tracks that I got in the box. Just thought I'd show you a little bit of a before and after there. Incredibly simple, takes about 20 seconds for each track, but it really makes a difference and helps it sort of blend into the table a bit more. And I always like to use more than one colour when doing something like this, just to make it a little bit more three-dimensional. And using contrast, Creed Camo just adds a little bit of green to the mix. So buildings will often be mossy or something like that, and the green just really complements the kind of the dirty brown a little bit. Again, through the airbrush, just like the garage sewer. I try to do it in areas by itself, sometimes overlapping the brown areas, and streak the same way, just a little bit lighter with the green and a little bit less often. It works really well on the sort of the metal roofs and things as well. Greens and even blues sometimes work well to sort of bring out metallic colours, and again it just looks that kind of mossy and weathered in, dirty looking colour. And I wanted to keep this as simple as possible in terms of the number of paints and things that you may need. As I carry the colour over to the railway station, pretty much the same as I was using on the signalman's tower. I just think you can really sort of see the effects start to come together, and it's incredibly simple to do. Like I said, if you don't have an airbrush and you have some good sort of large dry brushes, some of the makeup style brushes are brilliant, especially if they've got a little bit of firmness to them. Very, very gently dry brushing in some of the areas like this will create a similar effect. Now, no green on the desert building. I didn't think that quite matches the colour sort of palette I was going for. So I'm actually going to use some contrast Agarash Dunes, which is a kind of ochreish yellowy colour. If you go very heavy with it, it's quite bright. So I'm just being very gentle here. I'm just adding a little bit of variation to the building, focusing on the top, some gentle streaks down, just to kind of give an idea of some slightly different coloration within the sandstone there. Now that's all the airbrushing done and dusted with, and I was reaching for Contrast Black Legion here. This is a slightly warmer tone of the two contrast blacks, and I'm actually going to use it to sort of paint in edges around the windows. Now it's hard to see in the video here, but the windows don't have very defined edges around them, and I find that the white colour sort of blends into the grey a little bit as well. So again, just to give it a little bit more depth and more of a three-dimensional look, painting a thin line around the edge of the window just makes them look like they're separate from the rest of the building in terms of its construction. And if you find that you go a little bit too thick with this, because it's contrast, go back with a clean wet brush and you can just feather it out a little bit and create a little bit of shadow, and I do that quite a lot throughout this process. I just take my time now and work my way around the whole building, adding these sort of black linings and then feathering it out slightly to create some shadow. Now with all the windows lined, it's time to return to the contrast garage sewer. But this time I'm actually brush painting in some streaks just to add a little bit more definition to where I've kind of put those basic outlines in with the airbrush. So these are more physical streaks, maybe slightly cartoonesque, but on the game table I want them to stand out a little bit. So I'll just slowly work my way around the building, adding these in just to make the buildings look that little bit more sort of dirty and grimy. Again, if it's too thick, go in with a clean brush afterwards and just sort of feather it out. And now exactly the same process, but with Contrast Creed Camo. Now, just like with the airbrush, I probably tried to add a few less markings in green. Don't want it to sort of look like the house is completely run down, just well weathered. And also adding a few streaks and things to the roof. And then I follow those processes up on the railway buildings as well. And just with the garage sewer on the desert building, I don't want to use any of the Creed camo on here, just as I did before. If you want to paint a little marking halfway, if you put a little sort of scratch mark in at an angle, you can then paint a little sort of streak after that, as if the outer render has chipped away and a little bit of the dirt's run down, and when there has been some rain. Now for some Agarash Dunes, and much like I did with the camo green, I'm just adding a sort of secondary colour here, a slightly lighter colour, and painting a few streaks in with that as well. Now for some Vallejo thick mud, and it's European mud colour, which is more an effect rather than a basing texture. Obviously you can put it on bases, but it's something you may want to add after you've already added like a full texture on there. And this stuff is great. I use it all the time. You'll have seen it in previous videos if you watch my videos a lot. If you apply it really thick, it looks like wet mud. If you dampen it on and quite thinly, it dries, so it looks quite dry, and it just looks like speckled built up dust. And again, it's just that next layer of dirt and grime, which will mean that when the building's sitting on the tabletop, it doesn't look quite so much like it's floating there. It does look like it's in the environment as well. Obviously that can be aided by making sort of gardens and things like that, or pathways for the houses themselves, which is something I may well do in a future video when I've got around to making them for myself. And just like before, you can use the same effect on the railway buildings, and I think if anything, this stands out even better on this sort of lovely red brick colour that the pre-painted building came with. And with the train station itself, I continued to use the same process and even added a little bit on the platform and walkway itself. Now for the medium desert building, you can actually add it here as well. It just adds a little bit of extra texture for the stage that I have coming up directly after this. I actually use the combination of these Vallejo pigments on my desert bases. So there's dark yellow ochre, green earth and light senna. And I find that they're mixed together, they seem to be a sort of a perfect kind of dusty, dirty mix. And what I'm doing is brushing them directly onto the miniature. Now this miniature's got a lot of texture. So if I brush them directly in dry, blow the excess off, and it doesn't come off afterwards. You could fix it if you want to. It will change the colour a little bit, but because it's such a porous kind of rough texture on the edge of the building, by the time you've brushed it all in and blown off the excess, the rest of it is all stuck within the crevices and gaps and things. And you'll see at the end that it's a dull effect, but it looks like it's all sort of worn into the edge of the building. Now that's it. I could do an awful lot more. They aren't perfect, but I wanted to keep the tutorial as a bit of a how to quickly tart up your battlefield in the boxes, not how to completely repaint them, which you could obviously do. So it's a way of still having the time saving of buying the pre-painted miniatures, but also just adding a little bit more to make them a little bit more worn and weathered. I think my favourites have got to be the railway buildings. I think the colours used just seem to work with them and complement them even better than it does with the others. As I said, they're not perfect, they're slightly cartoonesque, but that sort of matches my painting style at times. But I think they look great on the table now rather than the way they did before, which were fine. They're still nice buildings. I'm not knocking Battlefield in the Box stuff. I own so much of it because I like it, but just adding that extra sort of layer weathering and painting and things just really makes them look like war games terrain for me rather than something that's a little bit bland and bright. I'm looking forward to getting my own desert scenery out, so I've got to send this building off, but I'm going to use exactly the same methods for when I get around to painting the desert ruins bundle that I've got sitting waiting for my North Africa project. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the video and found it useful one way or another, or has given you some ideas of how you may weather up some pre-painted buildings. I do very similar things with pre-painted MDF buildings I have, and you can see some of those in the background on the shots now. If you have any ideas yourself, things that you've done yourself that works really well on these buildings, any ideas, I'd love to hear from you. As I said, I've always been a fan of Battlefield and Box stuff, but I found that they complement very well by adding little bits of extra detail here and there, and I've really enjoyed doing it on these ones here. If you haven't already checked out the Pimp My Road video and you've liked this one, it's definitely worth having a look. It's very similar in many ways, using some similar colours to the airbrush. There's also a little bit of work with some UV resin to add some puddles and things to the roads. If you haven't used that before, you can see how simple that is as well. If you are new to the channel, please do check out the other videos. There's lots of Flames of War videos on there now, something I've been working on a lot recently, but the channel is also full of lots of epic battles, American Civil War and Napoleonic. They are ranges I've covered in detail, lots of painting tutorials and things. There's some Middle Earth on there and a few other things as well, so do go and check those out. If you've enjoyed the video, please do give us a like. It's greatly appreciated. It helps the video out loads and it helps show me that you've enjoyed what I've done. And if you haven't already and you do like the other videos and things on the channel, please consider subscribing. Thank you very much for watching. Take care and I'll catch you soon.